Your guests will notice if they are welcome in the neighborhood or not. I think the most important thing is to really communicate with your neighbors, whether they're an apartment next door or the house down the street. Regulation is obviously a big challenge for this industry. It is still a bit underestimated how big of a threat it actually is.
Should noise monitors be mandatory in every short-term rental? What happens when hosts neglect their neighbours? And which trends will define the vacation rental industry in 2025? On today's episode of the Host Planet podcast, we're joined by Nils Mattisson, the CEO and co-founder of Minut, to explore how hosts can be responsible community members and run successful and sustainable businesses. Nils, thank you for joining us on the Host Planet podcast. What should short-term rental hosts and property managers do in order to be a good neighbour?
I think the most important thing is to really communicate with your neighbors, regardless of whether they're an apartment next door or the house down the street. Part of running a short-term rental business is you never know what's going to happen on any given day. And if you have a good relationship with your neighbors, a lot of those things become a lot easier. And if you have open communications with them. So I think that's the most important thing.
So it's just a case of maybe when you buy a rental or you take over the management of it, just knocking on the door, giving them your number, giving them your email address. Simple as that.
Yeah, listening to their concerns or maybe their circumstances, and then use that to communicate to your guests, so your guests understand what the environment that they are staying in gives.
I must admit, I had one issue. I had a neighbour one time who was complaining a little bit, and he really appreciated that I gave him a call and just said, look, sorry about this, it's being sorted out. So I think taking that time to just have a chat with your neighbour, just pick up the phone in the same way that you deal with a guest, really, it can really pay dividends in the end. Because if you don't have the neighbours on your side, then the ramifications can be pretty negative, right?
Right. I mean, your guests will notice if they are welcome in the neighborhood or not. And I think that initial welcome, we always wish it's the host or the property manager, but sometimes it's not. And I think having a supportive community around you can make a difference, not just to you, but to the guests as well. And of course, like if you get on the wrong side of a neighbor, there's a lot of things they can do now, complaining to councils, etc., to disrupt your business, and they can be quite costly. So I really think this is one of those things where a little bit of proactive work can make a huge difference down the line.
Yeah, that's the next question, really. I mean, the pitfalls, really, of not being a good neighbour are those things, complaining to the council, picking up the phone to the police, maybe, if there's any sort of issue. So trying to avoid that is so important. Let's talk a little bit about Minut then, obviously your company. So tell us how a monitoring tool like Minut can help you be a really good neighbour and a net positive in your community.
Yeah, so at Minut we help hosts be good neighbors. That's part of our mission, and of course the most important aspect of that is noise. That is the number one complaint that neighbors tend to have against short-term lets, which I think makes sense if we think about it. Like if you have a short-term let that is a bit conducive to gatherings or parties, that's going to happen more often than not when you're renting it out. And of course, as a neighbor, that can get quite annoying after a while. And so what we do at Minut is we have a sensor that is privacy conscious, so it doesn't pick up any information that can be tied to a specific individual, but can measure things like noise levels and occupancy levels. And then we use that information to actually communicate directly to the guest at first. And give the guest an opportunity to self-regulate and know that maybe they are being disturbing to the neighbors now. And we see that is in the vast majority of cases very effective in allowing guests to self-regulate, and we've seen that it creates a much lower number of neighbor complaints than you should expect otherwise. So that's probably the most important aspect of what we do.
Okay, real talk now for all you hosts out there. You know that moment when your guest messages you again with, "Hey, what's the Wi-Fi code?" Or you're staring at 5 different calendars, wondering if you've accidentally double booked the cottage. Yes, we've all been there. That's why here at Host Planet we recommend Hostfully. It's basically your rentals control centre. It handles bookings across all the big platforms, syncs your calendars to ensure there are no double bookings, automates guest messages, and even creates these really slick digital guidebooks that stop all the repeat questions. Honestly, it just makes your life easier and keeps your guests happier, helping you achieve those all-important 5-star reviews. And here is a little bonus. If you're a Host Planet listener, you can get $500 off onboarding for Hostfully's property management software and 30% off digital guidebooks for life. Just hit the link in the show notes and use the codes PLANET500 for the PMS and HostPlanetGB for the guidebooks. And if you'd like a proper walkthrough, there's also a link to book a demo with Frank Bosey from Hostfully. He will show you how it all works. Less stress, more bookings, sorted with Hostfully. So in terms of the kind of the functionality then, how exactly does that work? How does the guest get the alert? Is it some kind of alarm? Is it a message?
Yeah, so we work with Airbnb and a lot of PMSs, etc. So typically the guest will get the message through the platform which they made the booking through, and it'll be something that the host can change depending on what they what they wanted to say. Maybe you spoke to your neighbors earlier and they have a specific need. Maybe it's the kid's bedtime or something else, and you can change the message to be very factual around that. But we see that like those automated messages that come just 10 or 15 minutes after noise has been detected are the most effective, and it can be the same for other monitoring aspects like cigarette smoke, for example. If you're in an apartment building, that's something that can quickly spread to the neighbors. And as well occupancy, right? Like even before things get loud, if you see that someone has brought their 12 closest friends to a 2-bedroom apartment, maybe that is something where you need to kindly remind them about the house rules. But ideally, from our perspective, and what we see is probably the best is to be even more proactive and to speak to your guests about Minut already at the booking. And have it on your listing and disclose what's going to happen under what circumstances. And then we actually see a lot fewer issues than you would have otherwise. So again, just as with your neighbors, I think communication with your guests can be, it can really help the relationship over the long term.
So how does the technology actually work in terms of the noise monitoring, the cigarette smoking, and also the number of occupants in the rental? How does the device actually know that these problems are happening?
Yeah, that's this is probably like the core IP of what we do, right? Like, because obviously you can infer all of those things with, say, a camera or other types of sensors, and the problem with those is that you are recording imagery or sound that can be violating someone's privacy. And especially when you send that to the cloud, you don't know where it goes. What's unique about Minut is that we do analysis directly on the sensor level, and only when something like cigarette smoke detection or loud noise has been detected does the sensor send that to the guest and the host. And what it sends is then not the raw data. It only sends exactly that message that the sensor has detected that the decibel level is 85 decibels in this flat, which is too loud in this circumstance. And the way we do it is that we have neural networks, the same type as you would have in a computer vision system, that takes different sensory input. So it could be sound, air pressure. In the case of cigarette smoke detection, it's a more air quality type data. And then you run this data through the neural network, and then the neural network is identifying events based on what comes into it. So it is something that only 10 or so years ago you'd say it was impossible to do on directly on a sensor, because it doesn't have much computational power. But of course, like with the revolution in artificial intelligence that we've been through over the last few years, suddenly all of these things are possible. And I think we're still just at the start of it. There is a whole lot more the sensor will be able to learn over the long term.
Exciting stuff. And tell us how you got started with this, because I know you've had quite an interesting background. You were out in Silicon Valley and working for some very interesting tech giants out there. So how did you come up with the idea for this business and the mechanics really of this technology?
Yeah, I think those were two different things, actually. Like, I came upon the problem, if you will, when I was in San Francisco. I was working for Apple, and I ran into one, if not the first employee at Airbnb when they were going through an accelerator called Y Combinator. And he was telling me how already in those early days they had issues with hosts who were renting out their precious homes, and they wanted to protect them, and the only thing that they had was cameras. But of course, you see that like as a guest, as a violation. And I thought that was a very interesting problem, right? Like you have two sides where if you solve it, it sort of gets better for everyone, and I like those kinds of problems. And then it was a few years later when I was at Apple, we did a lot of work with different type of machine learning systems, and I was at that point like starting to consider what my own startup would be. I was looking at a lot of different ideas, but then this. The development on the computer vision side had been that when I started working with those things, algorithm couldn't really tell the difference between a cat and a dog in a picture. It sounds ridiculous now, but it's not that long ago. But they rapidly became better, and eventually, of course, like surpassed humans. So a computer is a lot better at finding, a hidden cat in a picture than a human is. But sound was always behind, and there are a few reasons for that. Like sound is like different sound sources superimpose on one another. If you think about a picture, if you have one thing in front of another, then it gets completely hidden. That's not really the case with sound. It all melds, which makes it a little bit more difficult to identify the specific things. But the trajectory was still quite clear. Like just as you started from a point of quite crude algorithms that were often wrong, eventually the same type of intelligence that would work on imagery also would work on sound, and you would get to a place where a sensor or a computer, like listening to an environment, would understand more about that environment than a human would. And I saw how that technology, of course, that could be applied to this problem where you had an expectation of privacy, but you also had a monitoring need. And so that was really the realization that made me think, okay, this is actually something that's interesting enough that you can start a company around it. We didn't know exactly where it would go. We actually did not know that much about the short-term rental industry. We just knew that there's going to be environments where we expect privacy, but you have a stakeholder that needs insight from that environment that they need to be able to get without disturbing the privacy of that guest or tenant. And that's what we started with, and we sort of pitched it in a few different markets. Short-term rentals being one, but of course the one that took off, where the need was really, I think, the most critical, and maybe where the pain was felt the most clearly. So that's what we doubled down on, and it's been a great journey. It's a great industry, and I'm very happy that we found that little niche for us.
So at the moment, then, the technology, like we were saying, it's monitoring noise and cigarette smoke and occupancy. You mentioned there that you think it's going to develop. I'm not expecting you to share any trade secrets, but if you look into your crystal ball a little bit, how do you think your business will develop in terms of what it's going to monitor in future?
Yeah, so I think almost everything is possible, but there is no or rather, you shouldn't monitor things that you don't need. So I feel like it needs to start with the problems that our customers are having. Of course, noise and parties was like a relatively easy one. I think if I look ahead where things are heading now, the industry is professionalizing. There is more need for like operational efficiency. And so I think the kind of things that we would be looking at is more to do with making sure operations run very smoothly. Seeing have my cleaners been in the whole property? Have they spent a reasonable amount of time in the different places? Um, and then to trigger sort of automations based on that could be one. I also think it's more and more important that we do what we can to reduce the carbon footprint of the industry. I think that's something that hospitality operators in general really need to think hard about. And I think there's a lot of efficiencies that can be realized once you take guest behavior into account when setting heating and cooling and that sort of thing. And that's definitely something we can do already today, but I think it can get a lot better. So those are probably the major themes, and then we'll work backwards from that, and then say, okay, well, given that we need to have faster turnover, more efficient use of resources, then what are the things that we need the sensor to detect? And that's probably how we will go about it.
So a device that is monitoring guests, but also monitoring kind of every aspect of the property and managing it. That's kind of where you see things going.
Yeah, the way I would see it is more like monitoring the property without monitoring the guest type. So I think we need to like see ourselves in both parts of the both sides of the business here, and I think we really need to make sure that it's like a win-win-win. Like there should be something in it for the neighbor and the community. There should be something in it for the guest, or there should be something in it for the host. And the right balance to strike between like data and efficiency and integrity and privacy is when you see that it's like a clear win for all three. But when I talk about like guest behavior, I would say something like, detect maybe when there is no guest, and maybe when there is no guest, you turn off the AC for the day. So those would be the kind of things, or similar with heating in a cold climate.
Now, there are parts of the world, specifically in America, which mandate having monitoring tools like Minut in your rentals. Is that something you'd like to see everywhere?
Yeah, I mean, regulation is obviously a big challenge for this industry, and I think it is still a bit underestimated how big of a threat to it actually is. And right now we're dealing with a patchwork of regulation. It can be different city by city. Enforcement is very different, and I think that's actually really bad for the industry as a whole, because it makes it really hard for more professional operators to make sure that they are in compliance across their geographies. So while in general I'm in favor of more national or statewide or even European Union level regulation, I also think that when it comes to noise monitoring in particular, there are some places where it's needed a lot more than in others. And so, for example, like we worked with a couple of governments in California where there are times of the year in, for example, Coachella Valley, when there is a lot of people who come and visit for the music festival. And it basically became unlivable for regular residents, and that's not an environment that we could ever tolerate. So we worked with the city government there in La Quinta, and got minutes installed across the board, and we could see actually a reduction of neighborhood complaints with 85%. So it was quite effective. So in that environment, like, of course, it is probably the right thing. I think it's probably also the right thing in cities where we live close to one another, and I think noise and nuisance from short-term rentals is probably the main reason why people become antagonistic to the whole industry. And so I think we could actually nip a lot of regulation in the bud, a lot of more draconian regulation in the bud, if we worked closer with communities and made sure that we were less of a negative impact to the neighbors. But that said, there needs to be like a balance, because forcing a very rural property where maybe there is no neighbors nearby to have the same rules as you do like an apartment in London, I don't think is right. So finding that balance in the regulatory framework, I think, is the challenge, and I hope they get it right.
What's the feedback that you get from customers who've used Minut in terms of the before and after? I mean, you're talking a little bit as well about the impact on the neighbours, noise complaints potentially reducing by 85% in a place where there is Coachella. I imagine there were a lot before, so it's reduced significantly. So what's the feedback that you get from both sides, I guess, the owners and also the neighbours?
So I think especially slightly professional owners that have maybe 5 or 10 properties, for them, it happens a lot. So when they install Minut, suddenly they get a lot of time back, they get a lot of stress that they didn't need, and so there, of course, people are quite happy, and I think almost the bigger you are, the more of an impact it does, because as a property manager, these are the kind of things that comes to you if it's not handled before. But of course, also more owners. Many owners love their second homes, and we also do a lot of things like indoor climate monitoring, and water leak detection, and these kind of things. And we have saved over the years many properties from being completely destroyed. And those are always the most appreciative messages from customers that I get, is when we've saved their old family home from some sort of destruction. And there has been a lot of different stories over the years, and so those are probably some of my favorite ones.
In terms of communication, it's something that you touched on before. What's the best way of communicating to your guests that a tool like Minut is in your rental? And also, what's the best way of communicating it to the neighbours? Because I imagine the neighbours will feel a level of comfort if owners are using this type of tool.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of property managers use it in their communication when trying to attract owners as well. So it becomes obvious who is a more conscientious property manager and not. We one of our company values is transparency, and I think it's very important given the type of business that we run. And so we are always in favor of disclose it on your listing, explain what it is. And if you explain what it is, it's not scary. If you find it in the middle of the night as a guest and you're wondering what is this, that's not a good experience. So I always say put it in the house rules, put it when you put it on the listing, and ideally also when you check in. And we have tools to facilitate that sort of automated messaging based on when a guest is actually entering a property, etc., which can mostly be used to elevate the experience, right? You come in and you are welcomed at the right time, rather than at the 10 a.m. check-in time or 2 p.m. check-in time that is in the rule book. So yeah, that's what I would say. People are not going to get every message; they are going to miss it. But so you have to put it in several places and be quite proactive about it and timely about it.
Yeah, very important. Yeah, be open about it, because it's going to be something that a lot of guests are going to respect. I think a lot of guests will probably prefer it as well, because it shows that you're taking your rental and your property seriously. Okay, then just moving on a bit to about 2025. So, what are the trends that you're seeing in the STR space that hosts and property managers should be aware of?
Yeah, so regulation, we touched upon that. Like, I still see that as a force that is like reshaping the industry, and that's something I hear from customers really all over the world. We now saw new regulations in Vienna, for example, which directly affects our customers there, and I think especially like the more professional managers that we work with. I don't mean professionals in the behavior, but like as like larger companies, they're seeking to invest in places where there is lower regulatory risk, and so I see a lot of investment being made into things like apartment hotels and sort of repurposing maybe old school hotels to something that is a bit more short-term rental. So remove a lot of the staff and install sort of kitchenettes and that sort of thing. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad development. I think that's probably something which sits a little bit in between your typical short-term rental and a hotel that can fit a lot of types of travelers. So that's one thing. And then sort of on the other side, I would say like another trend that we're seeing is the emergence of a really like high-end class of properties, which is really nice to see. I think that's almost like something on its own, where a lot of people do like they put in a lot of work to the properties and they almost build their own brand around even like a single property. And I think that there's a lot of interesting implications for that in terms of like how do you acquire guests, build demand, and I'm looking forward to seeing more where that can go in the coming years.
Sounds good. Okay, then, Nils, we've got a few questions to finish. So, first of all, your favorite brand in the STR space, apart from Minut, of course.
Yeah, I struggled. I struggled with this one because like we have, of course, like over 10,000 customers, and I love them all. But one that stands out a little bit, and I would say also stands out in terms of how quickly they've scaled and the brand they've built, especially in the last year, is Wonder. I don't know if you've seen them. It's a US operator doing these like very very high end vacation rentals across America. If you haven't, then check them out. I think there is a lot of inspiration, even for smaller property managers, to be had there.
Excellent. We'll take a look and we'll include a link in the show notes. Wonder. Okay, an individual in the STR space you'd like to give a shout out to and why?
Yeah, I was going to give a shout out to my friend Alex Limpert of GuestReady. That's another company that I think is doing quite well and it has like a really good attitude to the industry. So yeah, if you have the chance, you should have Alex on your podcast as well.
Excellent. We'll see if we can get that organised. Nice shout out for Alex there. And finally, then, your number one lesson learned since founding Minut.
Yeah, there is a lot of lessons. I think the number one is, don't start your own company. No, like the thing that I come back to, like if you're trying to like distill a lot of the things that you encounter in a startup journey, it all comes down to people. And I think like having a long-term view on people, building your team, that's probably the thing. If there's like one thing that you want to tell like an aspiring entrepreneur, like it's really like think about the people that you choose to have on your team and think about them in a long term, like how are people developing, because that's ultimately what a company is. It's just a collection of people.
Very wise words. Yes, it is all about people, whether it's your customers, your team. That is the key. Nils, it's been a real pleasure. Thanks for joining us on the House Planet podcast and telling us all about Minut.
Thanks so much for having me, James.
Great to chat to Nils Mattisson there from Minut. I hope you found that episode useful in your quest to be a great neighbour and net positive for your local community. If you're looking for more free education, head to houseplan.club, the fastest growing multimedia platform in the short-term rentals industry. We're proud to help hosts and property managers supercharge their businesses by sharing a wealth of free content. Head online to sign up for our newsletter, download our suite of ebooks, and listen to our podcast series. Until next time, happy hosting.